So welcome, ladies, to a new year of Rosh Chodesh Society classes. The theme this year is a reason to celebrate. And what we will do throughout the next 7 months, we're going to explore various Jewish holidays and significant dates on the Jewish calendar. Why? You know, when it comes to Canada Day, for example, before we're off to Canada Place or Granville Island or wherever we're going to celebrate and see the fireworks, do we first take out a history book and delve into the background of Canada Day, of what we're celebrating?
We don't know.
Or Thanksgiving, for that matter, or New Year's, for that matter. Why, when it comes to the Jewish holidays, are we compelled to study, to learn more about them? Why can't we just do? We observe, we do the different rituals, different customs, we celebrate. Why is that not enough? Why do we also study the holidays before they approach?
It tells us who we are.
Good.
To remind us.
Okay. To remind us of what? You're right. There's something that we need to be reminded of, not just the day itself, that we just look on the calendar. We see the dates coming. Oh, it's almost July 1st. Okay, I got to make my plans, right? But obviously there's something more that we have to remember. Well, we're surrounded by airwaves, right? Airwaves all around us. But we don't become deaf. We don't find it noisy. We're completely unaware of them unless we're tuned in, right? Well, along the same lines, there's constant godly spiritual energies emanating in this world all the time. But we cannot really connect to it with our 5 senses, so unless we're tuned into them, we're completely unaware of these energies. Now, these energies fluctuate. They're not the same all year round. Just like we have physical seasons, fall, winter, spring, summer, we also go through spiritual seasons. And the different mix of energies revolves around the various Jewish holidays and the significant Jewish dates on our calendar. So, for example, the energy around the time of Yom Kippur is conducive to introspection. The energy around the time of Pesach, Passover, is conducive to experiencing personal freedom. And there's a special energy surrounding the time of Hanukkah, which empowers us in a certain way, which we will discuss tonight. The same energy that was the catalyst way back when for the event that we're celebrating today is present on that day every single year. So, for example, the same godly energy that was a catalyst for the exodus from Egypt way back then, thousands of years ago, every year on Passover, that same energy is in the air. So Jewish holidays are fundamentally different than secular holidays. Secular holidays are commemorative. We're remembering a past event. Secular holidays are about the past. Whereas Jewish holidays are celebrating a significant moment in time that reoccurs every single year. It's about the present. But you might ask, so what? If we're not aware of these energies, so it's very nice that these energies resurface every single year around the holiday time, but if we're unaware of them, what will they give us? You know, for example, if we look at the physical seasons, we're aware of the season, so we know what to do. When it's winter time and there starts to be snow on the mountains, what do we do here in Vancouver? We go skiing. few months later, it finally stops raining a little bit over here, and the sun's peeking out. What do? Maybe we go hiking, we go swimming. We're aware of the present conditions, we're aware of the season, so we act accordingly. So how does that work for the spiritual seasons? How do we know to act according to each particular spiritual season? So for that, we need a spiritual antenna. We need to tune in. Because when we're tuned into the spiritual season, when we're tuned into the energies, then we'll know what to do. And the spiritual antenna has two parts. Number one is awareness. And that comes through study. When we study in advance of a Jewish holiday, we will know all about that energy that's coming up. So when we reach that day, that time, we'll know what's going on and we'll be tuned in. We'll know what to take from it. And number two, the second part of our spiritual antenna is behavioral. God gave us certain practices, traditions, rituals, mitzvot, associated with each holiday that are conducive to taking advantage of the energy at that time. So back to our examples. Fasting on Yom Kippur is conducive to taking in the energy of that time, the energy of being introspective, of repentance. And eating matzah on Pesach is conducive to taking in that energy and experiencing a personal freedom. And the traditions and mitzvot of Hanukkah allow us to do the same thing with the energies around Hanukkah time. So first we study, we know what's coming up. When we get there, we could experience it. And we could do what needs to be done at that time to take in those energies. And just to note, something very interesting is that the energy goes a notch higher every single year. So picture a spiral staircase going around and around, but each time you get to the same point that you were just at, you're a little bit higher, right? So it's the same thing with the energy surrounding the holidays. Each year we get to the same point, it's the same date, it's the same type of energy, conducive to the same type of growth, but it's a notch higher. And there's many reasons for that. One reason is there is infinite depth to Judaism and our Jewish holidays. There's always more to learn, always more to experience. We are also different a year later. We have grown, we have changed, and so we're approaching that holiday from a different place, hopefully a higher place. And in general, the godly energy within the world each year is higher. Each Rosh Hashanah, when God gives energy to the world, is always on a higher level each year. So this year, Hanukkah will be experiencing the highest level energy so far that's ever been experienced in our history. So let's take a look at Hanukkah, delve a little bit deeper, and see what we can get from it. Now, ladies, before we begin and get into the class, I'd like to respect everyone's time, and therefore I want to end on time. The class ends at 8:30. So I will ask you, please, just to hold any questions, comments until the end. And I'm more than happy to stay and discuss with you. And in fact, I look forward to hearing any insights and questions that you may have. Okay, so let's begin. Let's begin with a little bit of historical background to Hanukkah. So some of you may be more familiar with the story than others. We'll go through it quickly. And it gives us a little bit more of a context of what we will be discussing tonight. So the Hanukkah story took place approximately 2,000 years ago. And at that time, Israel was under Greek-Syrian rule. The Greek Empire was divided into two parts, and the Syrian Empire was what was dominating Israel. And Hellenism was really taking on across the entire Greek Empire, which stretched from the Mediterranean all the way to the borders of India. Wherever someone would travel in those days, they would find the same culture, the same philosophies, the same stadiums and sports. Hellenism was that infusion of Greek culture throughout the entire Greek Empire. And, unfortunately, it also had a tremendous effect on many Jews living in Israel at the time. Mostly the more wealthy, the upper class of the Jewish people. A lot of them assimilated and left their Jewish practice behind and adopted Hellenism as their culture. And there was quite a bit of tension within the Jewish community then as well, because the assimilated Jews, the Hellenists, they felt themselves to be more enlightened, and they looked down on the more old-fashioned Jews, so to speak. And it wasn't an easy time, but things came to a head really when Antiochus IV assumed leadership of the empire. He made it his mission to root out Judaism entirely, and he was ruthless, and thus began the reign of terror. He was cruel. Anyone who would not take on Hellenism, who insisted on practicing his own beliefs, and we're talking primarily Judaism, was tortured, was killed. And there's a famous story of an elderly Jewish sage, Rabbi Eliezer, 90 years old. He was a very influential Jewish leader, and the Greeks were determined to get him to eat pork in order to serve as an example to the other Jewish people. Because if Rabbi Eliezer ate pork, then it must be okay. And you can imagine Rabbi Eliezer would not do that. So the Greeks said, okay, don't, but at least pretend you're putting it to your mouth so everyone will think that you did it and they'll follow your example, which is what they wanted to accomplish. And he refused, and he was put to death. And there are many, countless stories of this sort, unfortunately, during the reign of Antiochus. Women who insisted on circumcising their babies, if they were caught, they were killed with their babies hanging around their necks. And Torah scholars were hunted down and killed. And just one awful story after the other. The Jews were prevented at all costs from practicing Judaism. Brit Milah, Shabbat, Kashrut, family purity, all the rituals, the traditions, what makes up a Jewish life, our lifeblood, was not allowed, was banned under threat of death. And it came to a point where the Jews realized that their strategy until now, which was passive resistance and just trying to do what they could on the sly and hiding out, they realized it was no longer working. And at that point, one of the priests, Matisyahu, and his 5 sons formed the legendary group, the Maccabees, led by one of the sons, Judah, or Yehuda HaMaccabee. And just an interesting side note, does anyone know where the name Maccabee comes from? Excellent, Anat. Thank you. It's a phrase, Mi kamocha be'elim Hashem, which means, who is like you among the strong ones, God? And this became the slogan of the Maccabees, to remind them that no matter what happens in battle, whether they win, they have this victory, that victory, it's not because of their own might, it's because of God. And this was very important to remember because according to the laws of nature, they had no chance at winning. The only way they could win was an open miracle from God. We're talking about the Greeks here. They were the superpower at the time. They were an army of 50,000. They had all the advanced weaponry of the time. They rode their vintage tanks, known as elephants. And the little Jewish army was basically made up of 6,000 rabbis and yeshiva bachrim, yeshiva students, who had absolutely no military training. Primitive weapons, if anything. So maybe they had some bows and arrows, some boulders. They used their bare hands if they had to. So the odds didn't look too great for the Maccabees. But as we know, they were victorious. A miracle took place, and they defeated the massive, strong Greek army. So after the war was won, the Maccabees went right away to the temple. This was during the time of the Second Temple, and it was in ruins. Things were just plundered and broken, defiled. And they set up a new altar, a new Mizbeach, rededicated it on the 25th of Kislev, which is the first day of Hanukkah. And then came time to light the menorah. What do they need to light the menorah? Shemen, very good. Oil. It's one problem. They were looking for oil. There were a lot of flasks of oil, but none of them were usable because the seal of the high priest on those flasks was broken, which means that the oil was no longer pure. The oil was impure. And the best oil to use for lighting the menorah is pure oil. So the Maccabees were determined to find some pure oil so they could light the menorah. They searched, and probably familiar with the story. They found one little jar that was enough for one day.
One day, but it lasted 8.
Excellent, exactly. So they lit it anyways, knowing that it was only enough for one night, and knowing that it would take 8 days to produce more oil and transport it to Jerusalem. But nonetheless, they didn't want to delay in the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. They lit it right away, and as Natalia correctly said, the oil lasted for 8 days, 8 nights. Anyone know what Hanukkah means?
Rededication.
Excellent. So that's one explanation, rededication, as a reference to the rededication of the altar, which they dedicated on the 25th of Kislev. Therefore, we celebrate Hanukkah, which means dedication, starting the 25th of Kislev. Great. Any other explanations?
Celebration of light, isn't it?
It is a celebration of light,
That's not what the word Hanukkah.
but that meaning is actually not found in the word Hanukkah. So you could actually divide the word Hanukkah into 2 parts. Chanu, which means they rested, on Chaf Hei. Anyone know what number Chaf Hei is equivalent to? The letters Chaf Hei? 25. Excellent. So Hanukkah is an allusion to the fact that the Jews rested on the 25th of Kislev, meaning rested from war. Okay, so that's where Hanukkah got its name. Now what we're going to do is to take a look at a famous Talmudic passage that discusses the miracle of Hanukkah. And in this passage, the sages are trying to get to the core of what Hanukkah is really all about. It starts, my Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah? If you take a look in your student book, it's on page 3, text 2 on page 3. Before we take a look at it inside, I would like to turn the question to you ladies. What would you say the celebration of Hanukkah is really all about? Why are we celebrating?
Miracles.
Good. Okay, we're celebrating miracles. Now let me make that more specific. I'll narrow that down. Which miracles are we celebrating?
Hashem's hand.
In which sense?
Well, the fact that there was 5,000 in the Greek army and only how many in the
50,000 in the Greek and 6,000 in the
Okay,
Jewish
so
army.
we saw an open miracle right there.
Okay, great. So we were victorious in battle. That was a huge miracle.
Okay, right there and there we saw Hashem's hand.
Okay, so you say that's what we're primarily celebrating on Hanukkah. Okay, great. I hear you. Sounds good.
Sure, that's the first step.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other thoughts?
Celebrating the miracle of the oil.
Okay, celebrating the miracle of the oil. Good. Now, Haley, let me ask you this. Would you say we're celebrating the miracle of the oil, and that's what we're celebrating? Or would you say we're celebrating it in addition to what our other friend Haley mentioned, the war of the miracle of the war?
Yeah, and the miracle of the war, and just that
Hashem's
miracles were happening, I guess.
Hashem's
Okay,
hand.
so both miracles, you would say. It's a time of miracles. Okay, great. Anyone want to add anything?
I always think it's being related to freedom of religion and being able to practice your religion.
Okay, great. That's a very good thought, Claudia, and I want you to hold on to. We're going to get to it a little bit later. Okay, so thank you for bringing it up. We're going to get to that soon. Let's take a look at the text 2 inside, and let's see what our Talmudic sages defined the celebration of Hanukkah as. Does anybody want to read that?
I thought I'll share my book and I can read with you.
Okay, thank you, ladies. So then you have one as well.
Sure, I'll read it.
Okay, go ahead, Rivka. Thank you.
What is Hanukkah? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, they ritually defiled all its oil. Then when the royal Hasmonean family overpowered them and was victorious over them, they searched and found only a single cruse of pure oil with the seal of the high priest intact, enough to light the menorah for a single day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the menorah with this oil for 8 days. The following year, they established these 8 days as a holiday for praise and thanksgiving to God.
Okay, thank you, Rivka. So, ladies, having read what our Talmudic sages have to say about the why of Hanukkah, does that agree or disagree with what you ladies have been saying is the essence of Hanukkah?
I agree. That's what it is.
Okay. It's interesting, though, that there's no mention of the war in this passage. Just the oil. Now, the truth is that there have been many, many, many miracles over the course of our history. We wouldn't be here today as a Jewish nation if not for all the miracles that we've experienced throughout history. But we don't have a holiday to commemorate each of those miracles. We'd have to take off even more work than we already do, right? If we had a holiday for every miracle that occurred in our history. So, the miracles that tend to get celebrated are the ones that have a great national implication, for example. Like Purim, the miracle of Purim, where the Jewish people were supposed to be completely wiped out. That has national implications. If Judaism was under threat and Judaism was going to be totally wiped out, so that is a miracle of national implication. But a miracle such as the oil, that is not to put it down, not to take away from it. It is a tremendous miracle. That's something that was supposed to last for 1 day, lasted for 8 days. But we've had many miracles in that category, so to speak, and we don't celebrate them. Yet that is, of the 2 miracles of the Hanukkah story, that is the miracle that our sages are singling out. Not the military victory, which does seem to have tremendous national implications. Judaism was saved when we won the war. But our sages don't touch on that at all. Now, on a simple level, the truth is that, unfortunately, the Jews' victory, the Maccabees' victory, was pretty much short-lived. It didn't take more than a few generations until the Hashmonean dynasty became quite corrupt and did not lead the Jewish people in a way that was based on Torah values. They didn't lead in a good way in general. And then it didn't take too long either until the Romans took over and the Greeks were out of the picture anyways. So it wasn't a long-lasting victory. That happens to be true. But still, that doesn't explain why we're celebrating the miracle of the oil when we don't celebrate hundreds or thousands of miracles that are on the same page as the oil miracle. So if the sages are putting emphasis on the miracle of the oil, it must be that it's this miracle that truly defines Hanukkah. Our sages are saying, my Hanukkah, what in the world is Hanukkah about? And the answer, it's about oil. It's the oil theme. And you know what? Even the miracle of the victory of the Maccabees versus the Greeks, that is all part of the oil theme. Hanukkah is about oil. That's what we're celebrating.
Because everything's fried on that holiday.
Well, that's a result of us celebrating oil. That's why we light the menorah with oil.
And we eat everything with oil.
Right, exactly. It's the oil theme, right?
Rabbi Dubrovsky taught us lachatz, pressure. That's how oil is formed.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're under pressure, we thrive.
Beautiful. That is something very special about oil. There are some other properties of oil as well that we're going to discuss tonight. There's actually a lot of interesting things to say about oil. So before we get to the oil, what we really need to do to understand the significance of oil in the Hanukkah story is we really need to get a deeper look, a better understanding, a better picture of the historical underpinnings of the Hanukkah story. The Greeks were definitely pursuers of knowledge. They were thinkers, philosophers, of course. They were also considered pretty open-minded. They were respectful of different ways of thinking, different schools of thought. They loved logic. They loved to understand. They respected wisdom. In fact, there were quite a few Greek philosophers that valued certain morals that don't contradict the morals of Torah. Certain philosophers that did abstain from too much materialism. There were certainly Greeks who respected a lot of the wisdom in Torah. They understood the need for certain mitzvot. I mean, honoring your parents, helping the poor, can't go wrong with that. They respected that. So what bothered them so much about Judaism? That they were going all out to get rid of it. They would do anything to uproot Judaism. If they respected knowledge, respected wisdom, open-minded, why did it bother them so much?
I think they were a threat.
They definitely were.
I was going to say jealous.
And on the other hand as well, though, if Greek philosophy could work with Torah in a certain respect, then why were the Jews so adamant about rejecting Hellenism and fighting all the way to the end against great odds to preserve their Torah way of life? So we have to say that although superficially, perhaps, there are some common denominators between Greek philosophy and Jewish philosophy. Nonetheless, at the very core of the two philosophies, there are fundamental differences. And in fact, this ideological difference between Greek philosophy and Jewish philosophy continues to define the difference between secular thought and Jewish thought today. Because after all, Greek thought influenced much of today's Western thought. So let's take a look at a slice of Greek philosophy. Text 3. I'm sorry, it's the learning exercise on page 4. Okay, so here we have a slice of Greek thought. There were many schools of Greek thought, but here we have a slice. Take a quick look at the two quotes we have here, one from Protagoras and one from Socrates, and see if you could find the thread that runs through the two, which really defines the core essence of Greek philosophy. Any ideas?
Knowledge.
I have an idea.
Thank you. Knowledge. Okay, wonderful. Anat?
Just the essence is that the center is the human being. Whatever we have, the body, the intellect, the mind, the heart, whatever we have, then refers to the Judaism that the center is God.
Okay. You're definitely on the right track, Anat. I think you're even way ahead of us already. Let's put Jewish thought on the side for now, and we'll get to that soon. And what you said about Greek thought is 100% true. It all revolves around man, the human mind. And like Haley said, knowledge, what the human mind can know, what the human mind can observe, what the human mind can prove and analyze. That's really at the bottom of Greek philosophy. What you see is what there is. To know something beyond doubts. You could prove it. That's Greek philosophy. But on the other hand, Judaism also encourages and promotes analysis, questioning. So what's the difference? So for that, I'm going to ask you to take a look at text 3 on page 4. Same page. Any volunteers to read? All right, I'll do it. The Greek mind, aside from worshiping human intellect, is also a great syncretist. That means it can hammer together the most incongruous ideologies without blinking an eyelid. When there's nothing higher than intellect, intellect has no guiding light. Without the supposition of a divine will, whatever you wish to make sense can make sense. Philosophers have justified everything imaginable, from Colosseum killing games to gas chambers. Torah is an understanding that behind the world lies a divine will, unhampered by the limitations of nature or human logic, because it is the source of all this. We can have 1,000 reasons for not mixing meat and milk, but when it comes down to it, we do it because that is our personal connection with the divine will, the life of all things. In other words, Greek philosophy is based on the foundation that man is the measure of all things, as Protagoras says, Greek philosopher. Man is the measure of all things, similar to what you said, Anat. That whatever man could prove, whatever man could observe and analyze, that is what there is. Whereas Judaism, on the other hand, is based on the foundation that there are certain truths that the finite mind of man cannot comprehend, ever.
Well, I think that's a question that I've always kind of said, that how do we not have these answers? We have these, scholars, and, how, and they're saying, well, possibly it was this or was that, and a lot of no real answers. But a rabbi once said to me that, and I asked this question, and he said, if we don't have all the answers, then it makes us learn and study more. So we need to evolve as humans, and perhaps that's why God doesn't want us to have all the answers for everything.
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent point.
I think, that kind of, made it seem really,
Mm-hmm.
I accepted that. I was like, that makes sense.
It does make sense. And you know what? It's what I like to call the faith sandwich. That Judaism starts off with the foundation of faith. We believe. That's a given. That's what we start with. That's plugged into every Jewish soul, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not. Every Jewish soul has that power to believe, and Judaism starts with that foundation. We believe. We believe there's something higher than us, beyond our own intellect, beyond our human body, beyond what we could understand. But having said that, we also have an obligation. It's a mitzvah. It's an obligation to question, to search, not out of cynicism, not out of skepticism, but because we yearn to connect as deeply as possible to the Torah and to the author of the Torah, to God. So we want to understand. We want to know more. This doesn't make sense. Why is this like this? I want to know why. Because the more we understand, the more we know, the more Judaism makes sense to me, and the more I will live my Judaism as a result. The more deeply I will be connected. But, again, having said that, going back to what you said, Haley, at the end of the day, no matter how much we've studied and searched and questioned, there will always be questions that were not answered. And you know what? That's okay. Questions are good too on their own. They don't always need to have answers. We've understood until here as much as we could. We spent a whole day searching and questioning, and we understood until here. After here, I'm going to go back to my foundation that I started with. It's the other bread of the sandwich, faith again. We have faith that we start with, the meat in the middle, the questioning, the searching, the answering, and then the layer of faith on top. Whatever I couldn't answer, I still believe. And the beautiful part is what you were saying, Haley, is that tomorrow I'm going to start all over again. I'm going to continue to study. I'm going to continue to search. I'm going to continue to find out more answers. And you know what might happen is that some of the questions that I was left with at the end of the day yesterday, that I just left because I believe there are answers even if I don't get them. Today, when I continued studying and took my studying to a new level, I might have answered some of those questions. But I'm still left with new questions. And that's okay, because I still believe there's an answer even if my mind can't grasp them. Maybe tomorrow I'll find an answer, maybe I won't. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, I believe my mind can grasp what it could grasp. We're humans. We cannot completely grasp the infinite. It's impossible. There will always, always be things that I can't grasp. And we just keep on studying and believing. And it's a constant cycle, a constant sandwich, so to speak, of faith, studying, understanding, and more faith.
It's a good formula.
Mm-hmm.
Study,
it's interesting that even when it comes to the mitzvot, there's all types of mitzvot. There's mitzvot that make sense to a human mind, like honoring your parents and helping the poor and not to murder and steal, right? That makes sense. Then there's mitzvot that really don't make sense. We do them anyways, like eating kosher, for example. Okay, but we do them all. And what's interesting is that even the mitzvot that make sense, Hasidic philosophy teaches us that even the reasons that we attribute to these mitzvot, it's not even the whole picture. Even those mitzvot, there's still reasons that we don't really get. We still don't know the whole picture. So every time we do a mitzvah and we're connecting to God, there is that level of I'm doing it because I believe, because God knows better than me what I need to do, and that's why I do it. And you could apply this concept, it's a great metaphor, is within human relationships. Say your spouse asks you to go grocery shopping on Tuesday, if you don't mind, because then, since he has to make his own lunch for Wednesday for work, he has what he needs to make lunch. Okay, does that make sense? That makes sense. Well, the spouse does it. Let's say your spouse asks you to always wash his socks by hand. Now, if it was me, I would be like, that really doesn't make any sense. Nothing would happen to your socks in the washing machine. And it's just a whole lot more work for me. But I do it. So I'm going grocery shopping on Tuesday. That's one thing my husband asked of me. He doesn't ask too much, so I'm going to go grocery shopping on Tuesday, and I'm going to make sure to wash his socks by hand. Let me ask you, ladies, which of the two is more romantic? What would you say?
Well, neither, but grocery shopping makes better sense.
Okay, it makes better sense. Is it more romantic? You say it is.
Yes.
Okay.
You're buying groceries, this is...
Sorry?
I think this thing with the socks more romantic.
Why?
Because it's like you making it by yourself and you put some, I don't know, some
Love
sin,
into
some
wash
love
yourself.
or something. My husband asked me to do it, and I do it because I want to do for him something what he asked. It's like love. I don't know.
Yeah, when you do something for someone and it doesn't make sense to you, it means you're doing it only because that person asked you to. That's a lot of love in that action.
Yes.
There's nothing to do with you. It's only because of your spouse or whoever this relationship is applying to, whoever you're doing something for. It's only for them. Because to you it makes no sense. And that's very precious. It's very meaningful. And this element in Judaism of having something that goes beyond our intellect and connecting to that is very meaningful in our relationship with God. That we do it anyways, even if it doesn't make sense. And you know what?
First we do it, and then we will understand.
Right, exactly. Very good. And this is exactly what drove the Greeks crazy. This core element of Judaism is diametrically opposed to the core element of Greek philosophy. Greeks are all about what you see, what you could prove. And Judaism says, no, there's also something beyond what you can see, beyond what you could prove, and it's on that that we base what we do. And the Greeks couldn't stand that. That made them crazy. And you can understand why the Jews were so firm about retaining their faith and fighting for their faith. Because to take on Hellenism, that's exactly the opposite of what Judaism is all about. If you take out the belief, take out the faith, what are you left with? And this brings us back to the oil. Rivka, you mentioned, you mentioned one property of oil, and which refers to how it's made, that you have to crush the oils, the olives, which is true. Once you have the oil, something interesting about oil is that when you mix it with other liquids, what happens to the oil? It separates. Which way? Above. It floats to the top. Everything physical in this world mirrors something spiritual that's going on. In other words, really, everything starts in the spiritual. There's all kinds of spiritual events happening right now. We're just not really tuned into them. And this physical world that we have around us is simply the embodiment, a physical embodiment of spiritual things that are going on. It's just the spiritual really trickling down to take on a form in our world so that we can relate to it. So oil is the spiritual embodiment, the physical embodiment of a certain spiritual concept. The concept of holiness. What does holiness mean? When we say that something is holy, we mean that it's set apart from other things. You have the mundane, and then different than the mundane, higher than the mundane, you have the holy.
It saturates everything.
Oh, that's another property of oil. Thank you. It saturates. We're going to get to that a little later, Rivka. So we'll hold on to that thought. Now, let me ask you this. Could you put holiness in a lab and observe it? Analyze it, measure it.
Well, you could put a bunch of buchers in a room. A bunch of buchers.
You can't really measure holiness, right? It's aloof. It's above. It's beyond human rationale. That's what holiness is. There's some things that we understand, and then there's things that are beyond our understanding. That's holiness. So, if the Hanukkah story is all about ideology, we can understand the problem that the Greeks had with the oil. Let's go back to the story for a minute. When the Maccabees went back to the temple after they won the war, what did they discover? All the little vials of oil, the seals were broken. Now, you would expect, the temple was filled with gold and silver and all kinds of precious objects. You would think that what would the Greeks do when they got into it? Yeah, they would plunder, they'd steal, take everything for themselves. That wasn't the case. They broke things, made them unusable, and defiled the oil.
So it wasn't kosher.
So they couldn't use it. Well, now we understand why they went for the oil. Now, the Greeks might not have been, I'm sure they weren't aware of this. They weren't aware that oil is the physical embodiment of a spiritual concept that is the antithesis of their philosophy. But it's interesting, Jewish thought explains that often people are driven to do things even when they're to do things that they might be unaware of why they're doing it, but really it's because of a really deep core value inside of you. So the Greeks might not have been aware that the reason why they were going for the oil is because the oil represented the antithesis to their culture. But the Greeks did know that they had to root out Judaism because Judaism definitely doesn't go with their culture. So they went for the oil. They went for that oil attitude. That there could be something above. That it's not all about me. It's not all about my mind. It's not all about human intellect. There is something beyond that. That's represented in the oil. And that is the antithesis, something beyond rationale. That's the antithesis of Greek philosophy, which is all about what I can understand, what I can prove, what I can observe with my rational mind. So they went for the oil.
So they went for the physical because they knew they couldn't go for this.
The physical represented the spiritual. Okay. So it was the physical, I guess you could say the physical action representing a spiritual war. Because that's really what Hanukkah was about. It was a war of ideologies, of thought. Not so much my army's bigger than your army and let's see who could win. So what the real miracle of Hanukkah was the triumph of Judaism. Was the oil. Saving the oil. Saving our belief system. Saving our spiritual water supply. What do people tend to go for in a battle? Save the water supply. Well, oil for the Jewish people is our spiritual water supply. Without our beliefs, without believing in something higher, what is our Judaism? And so the Jews fight for that to the bitter end. And the Greeks were determined to root it out because it was a clash of philosophies. Now, let's take this concept of the Hanukkah story, the Hanukkah miracle, and move it forward 2,000 years to us today. What does this mean for me? Why would a well-educated, someone who holds various degrees, come to a Torah class? Secular study has a lot to offer. The way of thinking that the Greeks opened up, the open-minded, inquisitive way of thinking, led to modern medicine, technology, amongst many other things. So a lot of benefits, lots to offer. What would a Torah class offer a modern, educated woman? You're all here tonight, all educated, enlightened, well-rounded. Why did you come here tonight?
Purpose.
It's an excellent word, purpose.
Meaning.
Meaning. Secular thought could answer a lot of important questions, like the whats and the hows of life, crucial questions to answer. But one question that secular thought cannot answer, that Torah can, is why. Is the why. I'd like you to take a look, please, at text 6 on page 8. And we have an excerpt from a book by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of England, and he puts it beautifully. Anybody would like to read this one? Okay, thanks, Natalia.
Think about it. Every function that was once performed by religion can now be done by something else. In other words, if you want to explain the world, you don't need Genesis, you have science. If you want to control the world, you don't need prayer, you have technology. If you want to prosper, you don't necessarily seek God's blessings, you have the global economy. You want to control power, you no longer need prophets, you have liberal democracy and elections. If you're ill, you don't need a priest, you can go to a doctor. If you feel guilty, you don't have to go to confess. You can go to a psychotherapist instead. If you're depressed, you don't need faith, you can take a pill. If you still need salvation, you can go to today's cathedrals, the shopping centers of Britain, or as one American writer calls them, weapons of mass consumption. Religion seems superfluous, redundant, de trop. Why then does it survive? My answer is simple. Religion survives because it answers three questions that every effective person must ask. Who am I? Why am I here? How then shall I live?
Thank you, Natalia.
Because the world was created for me.
That's right, and who can give us that answer? Not someone from within the system. Haley said, and the world was created for me. We need to find out our purpose. And someone who's within the world, within the system, we're not objective enough to figure that out, to figure out the why. Only the one who has the bird's eye view, who can see the entire picture from above, knows all the details, knows everything that goes into the picture, which we can't see. Only the one who could see that can tell us the whys, and that's God, and he tells it to us in the Torah. And that's what Torah has to offer us, the why. Why am I here? What am I doing here? And without the why, we can compare that to an alien who comes down to this world and he's observing an 8.5 pregnant woman, and he has to go back to his land and bring a report. So he watches and watches and watches, and then he goes back to his land, and his report goes something like this. So this condition seems to, the benefits of this condition seem to be varicose veins, heartburn, back pain, nausea. I conclude that this condition, pregnancy, is an unwanted condition. Well, obviously, what was he missing? The why. If he would only know the why, not just the what's that was going on, but he knew the why that was going on, well, all of a sudden that lends the condition meaning, and despite any discomforts, which are very real, it's still considered a beautiful condition to be in. Not, God forbid, an unwanted condition. So the why really makes all the difference. It's the why that infuses meaning into our lives, into what we do. So, as modern women today, in general, people today, we can easily become Hellenized in our own way. Everyone, myself included, which means we become desensitized to spirituality. We live in a very powerful culture, a lot of materialism in our culture. It's very easy to become desensitized to spirituality, to a higher purpose. And we have to remember that while we definitely don't reject the benefits of secular thought, when it comes to morality, when it comes to purpose, we look to Torah as a guide. And it's tough, because in that we would definitely be the minority. We are the minority. It's a struggle. It's not easy. But the energy of Hanukkah empowers us to do that. We can be the modern-day Maccabees, that despite what the rest of the world tells us, despite what we see out there in the world, it doesn't have to be like that. We have our values. We could look into Torah. We could see what our values are, what our purpose is, and stand strong for them, and live proudly as Jews. Be modern-day Maccabees and live proudly as Jews. Fight for our beliefs. Practice our beliefs, in other words, despite the culture out there, despite all the contradictions out there, despite all the obstacles that are out in the world towards doing that. And when we do find that strength within us, and when we're coming up to Hanukkah now, we're the first day of Kislev. Rosh Chodesh Kislev is tonight and tomorrow, so Hanukkah is coming up soon. We can grasp onto that energy. We can take in that Hanukkah energy and prioritize our values. Make Torah values our priority. And when we do that, we have actually accomplished a little Hanukkah miracle here in Vancouver.
And I think, people are always making excuses. Well, I couldn't do this. I couldn't. They've got excuses. But when you do it, you are empowered and you feel strong and proud that it's not that hard to light a candle at night, or it's not that hard to be a Jew. But some people will make excuses. But it feels really good when you can do all those things.
Mm-hmm. Well said. It's very true.
It's really nice to know why you're using oil for Hanukkah. Because as you start to cook latkes, light the menorah, all of those things, it gives a tremendous depth to what you're doing, a meaning beyond anything else at that time of year.
Mm-hmm. And I think, especially Hanukkah, it's no coincidence the time of year that Hanukkah comes on the calendar, because at the time of Hanukkah, we are really surrounded by a different culture.
And darkness.
There's a different culture very prominently out there at the time of Hanukkah, and to stay strong to our own culture, to find meaning in our own holiday, it could be a struggle for a lot of people. And it's interesting because instead of looking at Hanukkah as, well, it's different than everyone else, and I'd rather be like everyone else, it's Hanukkah itself that gives us the power to be proud of our own holiday, to be proud of what we have, to be proud of our purpose
and to have
and our meaning.
menorah that you come home to every night for 8 days to light is something to really look forward to.
Which we will discuss tonight. The same energy that was the catalyst way back when for the event that we're celebrating today is present on that day every single year. So, for example, the same godly energy that was a catalyst for the exodus from Egypt way back then, thousands of years ago, every year on Passover, that same energy is in the air. So Jewish holidays are fundamentally different than secular holidays. Secular holidays are commemorative. We're remembering a past event. Secular holidays are about the past. Whereas Jewish holidays are celebrating a significant moment in time that reoccurs every single year. It's about the present. But you might ask, so what? If we're not aware of these energies, so it's very nice that these energies resurface every single year around the holiday time, but if we're unaware of them, what will they give us? You know, for example, if we look at the physical seasons, we're aware of the season, so we know what to do. When it's winter time and there starts to be snow on the mountains, what do we do here in Vancouver? We go skiing. A few months later, it finally stops raining a little bit over here and the sun's peeking out. What do? Maybe we go hiking, we go swimming. We're aware of the present conditions, we're aware of the season, so we act accordingly. So how does that work for the spiritual seasons? How do we know to act according to each particular spiritual season? So for that, we need a spiritual antenna. We need to tune in. Because when we're tuned into the spiritual season, when we're tuned into the energies, then we'll know what to do. And the spiritual antenna has two parts. Number one is awareness. And that comes through study. When we study in advance of a Jewish holiday, we will know all about that energy that's coming up. So when we reach that day, that time, we'll know what's going on and we'll be tuned in, we'll know what to take from it. And number two, the second part of our spiritual antenna is behavioral. God gave us certain practices, traditions, rituals, mitzvot, associated with each holiday that are conducive to taking advantage of the energy at that time. So back to our examples. Fasting on Yom Kippur is conducive to taking in the energy of that time, the energy of being introspective, of repentance. And eating matzah on Pesach is conducive to taking in that energy and experiencing a personal freedom. And the traditions and mitzvot of Hanukkah allow us to do the same thing with the energies around Hanukkah. You're right, there's something that we need to be reminded of, not just the day itself, that we just look on the calendar. We see the dates coming, oh, it's almost July 1st, okay, I gotta make my plans, right? But obviously there's something more that we have to remember. Well, we're surrounded by airwaves, right? Airwaves all around us. But we don't become deaf. We don't find it noisy. We're completely unaware of them unless we're tuned in, right? Well, along the same lines, there's constant godly spiritual energies emanating in this world all the time. But we cannot really connect to it with our five senses, so unless we're tuned into them, we're completely unaware of these energies. Now, these energies fluctuate. They're not the same all year round. Just like we have physical seasons, fall, winter, spring, summer, we also go through spiritual seasons. And the different mix of energies revolves around the various Jewish holidays and the significant Jewish dates on our calendar. So, for example, the energy around the time of Yom Kippur is conducive to introspection. The energy around the time of Pesach, Passover, is conducive to experiencing personal freedom. And there's a special energy surrounding the time of Hanukkah, which empowers us in a certain way. So welcome, ladies, to a new year of Rosh Chodesh Society classes. The theme this year is a reason to celebrate. And what we will do throughout the next 7 months, we're going to explore various Jewish holidays and significant dates on the Jewish calendar. Why? You know, when it comes to Canada Day, for example, before we're off to Canada Place or Granville Island or wherever we're going to celebrate and see the fireworks, do we first take out a history book and delve into the background of Canada Day, of what we're celebrating?
We don't know.
Or Thanksgiving, for that matter, or New Year's, for that matter. Why, when it comes to the Jewish holidays, are we compelled to study, to learn more about them? Why can't we just do? We observe, we do the different rituals, different customs, we celebrate. Why is that not enough? Why do we also study the holidays before they approach?
It tells us who we are.
Good.
To remind us.
Okay. To remind us of what? Time. So first we study, we know what's coming up. When we get there, we could experience it. And we could do what needs to be done at that time to take in those energies. And just to note, something very interesting is that the energy goes a notch higher every single year. So picture a spiral staircase going around and around, but each time you get to the same point that you were just at, you're a little bit higher, right? So it's the same thing with the energy surrounding the holidays. Each year we get to the same point, it's the same date, it's the same type of energy, conducive to the same type of growth, but it's a notch higher. And there's many reasons for that. One reason is there is infinite depth to Judaism and our Jewish holidays. There's always more to learn, always more to experience. We are also different a year later. We have grown, we have changed, and so we're approaching that holiday from a different place, hopefully a higher place. And in general, the godly energy within the world each year is higher. Each Rosh Hashanah, when God gives energy to the world, is always on a higher level each year. So this year, Hanukkah will be experiencing the highest level energy so far that's ever been experienced in our history. So let's take a look at Hanukkah, delve a little bit deeper, and see what we can get from it. Now, ladies, before we begin and get into the class, I'd like to respect everyone's time, and therefore I want to end on time.